Hi, my name is Eric Olson, the Director of HELPS. This video is going to explain about seniors and bankruptcy, whether they need to file bankruptcy, and go into a little bit more detail. I've been an attorney for 40 years. I was a senior partner and founded one of the largest consumer bankruptcy law firms in the nation, and have filed probably close to or over 40,000 bankruptcies. I'm the director of a law firm called HELPS. And what HELPS does is we help seniors that are lower income, poor, whose income is Social Security, pension, disability, VA benefits, and protect them from collector harassment, and also educate them how they can maintain their financial independence. So let's talk about bankruptcy and whether it makes sense for a senior. The first thing that seniors need to understand, which many of them don't, and nothing wrong with that, is that Social Security, pensions, disability, and VA benefits are all protected from collection under federal law. They can't be taken from you. They can't be garnished. And that money doesn't need to be used to pay old debt. Well, where bankruptcy comes in is if a person has old debt and they're not able to pay it, what happens? The collectors call and can make their lives miserable. And so the first thing they think, well, if I file bankruptcy, I won't owe the owed debt. Well, then a lot of times they'll go to a bankruptcy attorney, and the bankruptcy attorney might tell them, well, you really don't need to file bankruptcy because your income, the Social Security you receive, is protected. No one can garnish it, no one can take it. But the problem for attorneys is when the person goes home, they know at night the senior's going to get a call from collectors, and that'd be very stressful. And so sometimes the senior will end up filing a bankruptcy just to get the creditors off their back. So let's talk about that. Some seniors can't afford to file bankruptcy. We already established that their income's protected, but if bankruptcy typically would cost, $1,000 to $2,000 per month to file it, probably an average of $1,500 to $1,700, $1,800. Filing fee for regular bankruptcy is $335, and then the attorney fee is on top of that, and often it's $1,200, $1,300, $1,400. So it's a lot of money to file a bankruptcy when one doesn't really need to be filed. So the question then is, if I don't need to file bankruptcy and I have old debt I can't afford to pay, what can I do to keep these creditors from calling me on the phone and bugging me? Well, okay, so there is a law called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. It's a federal law, and one of the things that law provides is if someone sends a collector, which is different than a creditor, a collector, what's called a cease and desist letter. And that letter essentially states, I don't want you to contact me any further about this debt. And you call it a cease and desist letter and you ask them to stop. Now, collectors know what that means, and normally they'll stop. Not all the times, but normally they will. If they don't, they could be sued. And you can find a copy of a cease and desist letter at our website, www.helpsishere.org, or just type in cease and desist letter sample and get one there. For a lot of seniors, however, they don't want to or unable to send a cease and desist letter. It's a little intimidating to them. They don't understand. Well, there's another provision in the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. When a person is represented by an attorney, collectors may no longer call or send letters to that person anymore. In fact, that's one of the top 10 commandments of a collection agency. If the person is represented by an attorney, I can't communicate with them. I have to communicate with the attorney. And so that's what HELPS does. HELPS was founded several years ago. What we do is we represent seniors and disabled persons who owe debt they can't afford as their attorney to receive collector communication. We do it nationwide. People enroll over the phone. It just takes a few minutes. The cost is either free or very minimal. And we represent them on an ongoing basis so they don't have to worry about being harassed by collectors ever again. So for seniors that can't afford to file bankruptcy and don't need to file bankruptcy, there's a solution to stop the collector harassment. And it helps. Do it on your own, but like I said, most seniors don't want to have to deal with that. New creditors, new collectors could call them on the phone later or send a new demand letter, or they get sued and they don't know what to do. And it's difficult. And that's what Helps does. We're always there for our clients. We answer their questions and talk to them if we represent them on an ongoing basis, so they don't have to worry about these debt collectors. But let's get back to bankruptcy. Bankruptcy attorneys might say that bankruptcy makes sense because if you don't file bankruptcy and then when you die, before your heirs get anything, that means your children or your family who want to get money from your estate, your creditors have to be paid first. And that's true, they do have to be paid first. But for many seniors, they don't have a lot of assets, the minimal amount. There's nothing to leave to the heirs. Maybe they're buying a home with little or no equity, and it doesn't look like there's going to be that in any time in the future. Or they're not worried about it. Also, it's a fact that almost a half of seniors, before they pass, they end up on Medicaid, and the government ends up getting whatever assets they do have to pay for the nursing home expenses. So for a lot of seniors, the argument that, well, you need to file bankruptcy, you can leave your heirs something, it's not always a valid argument. And the other thing, you can always file bankruptcy whenever you want. There's no time limit. If you're young and you file bankruptcy, you've got plenty of time to incur new debt that wouldn't be covered because you'd already filed the bankruptcy. So that's a factor. Now, sometimes seniors will go to a bankruptcy attorney, and unfortunately, some of them may not tell them that their income's protected. I think most of them do. They may lead them to file a bankruptcy. What's the answer? Why does that happen? Well, everyone who has a job they're there to make money in their field that they make money in. And, if you have a doctor and you've got a problem, if you got a problem, you go to a medical doctor, he's going to give you some pills. If you go to a chiropractor, he's going to make some adjustments. If you go to an acupuncturist, he's going to punch holes in you to fix you. Any people act within the area of their expertise. So sometimes bankruptcy is treated as a panacea to solve every problem financially, when in fact it doesn't need to be. And especially for lower income seniors that can't afford to, don't need to, might not be a good idea. Okay? And then sometimes it's given as a reason to restore credit. File bankruptcy. Otherwise, if you don't file bankruptcy, you're going to have bad credit forever. Well, since 2008, the Great Recession, the rules on credit have changed quite a bit. Creditors that extend credit want to look at a person's ability to repay the debt. And you can have a real good credit score, but you might not be able to get good credit just because your income's low. Now, if you file a bankruptcy and it's going to wipe out all your credit. It's going to wipe out the credit you owe money to, and the credit card companies, all of them, I believe, subscribe to a service that lets them know when someone files a bankruptcy. So if you have a credit card that you owe nothing on that you think you're going to keep and you file bankruptcy, that credit card company, the bank is going to receive a report that you filed bankruptcy, you're going to cut your credit off. And if you intentionally leave a creditor off your bankruptcy, which you're not supposed to do, they're going to find out about it and cut your credit off. And then your credit's going to be shot for probably 4 to 5 years for getting an unsecured Visa or MasterCard without having collateral to back it. So bankruptcy isn't always a magic wand to be able to restore your credit. A lot of seniors aren't worried about it. They don't need credit, they don't want it, and therefore that's not a reason. Now, bankruptcy can be a problem for seniors, and I'll explain why. Every state has what's called exemptions, and that's property you're allowed to keep when you file bankruptcy that no one can take from you. And it varies from state to state. So much equity in a home, so much equity in a car. And if you live in a state and you have some property that are over the exemption amount, and you file Chapter 7, then the Chapter 7 trustee can say, well, I want that property you have. I want that car. I'm going to sell it. I'm going to take the money and use it to pay your creditors since you filed bankruptcy. Or a common example is a home, for example. Let's say you've got a home that is worth $150,000 and you owe $100,000, and so you have a $50,000 equity in your home. And the state where you live, the exemption is $25,000. So if you file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, the trustee would take your home, sell it, pay you $25,000, take the rest of the proceeds from the home, sell the home, and use to pay your creditors. Now, you don't want that to happen, obviously. So that would be an impediment to you filing bankruptcy. Well, maybe a bankruptcy attorney might tell you, well, you can prevent that from happening by filing another type of bankruptcy called a Chapter 13. Now, a Chapter 13 is a bankruptcy that is filed. One of the reasons to file it is to protect assets that you have that you would otherwise lose in a Chapter 7. And the way a Chapter 13 works is you make payments to a trustee for a period of 3 to 5 years. And then he takes those payments and he uses it to pay your creditors. And because you're in a Chapter 13, they would let you keep that home. But let's say, for example, the amount you need to pay in a Chapter 13 to keep that home is $25,000 to your creditors. Well, the longest you can be in a Chapter 13 for is 5 years, 60 months. And then you've got to pay the Chapter 13 fee and a trustee commission. So let's say, for example, that totals to be $30,000 for everything. Well, obviously, $30,000 divided by 60 months is $500 a month. So if your income is $2,000 a month from Social Security and maybe a $200 pension, $500 is going to leave you with $1,700 a month. And then you subtract the house payment, it leaves you with virtually nothing. So by filing a Chapter 13, sure, you filed a bankruptcy to get rid of the unsecured debt, but you're poverty stricken for 5 years. You're strapped without money for anything, hardly. So what's the answer? Well, if you do nothing, what's going to happen if you don't file bankruptcy? And you've got, let's say, $25,000 in debt, most of it's credit cards. So the worst that's going to happen is a credit card is going to sue you and get a judgment against you. Now, I've already explained that they can't take your Social Security, they can't take your pension and your retirement income. If you have a little job, you're allowed to take $217.50 net per week from wages, more in some states. So they can't do that. So your income is safe. Now, are they going to take my home if they get a judgment? No, absolutely not. Collectors, even if you have an equity over and above the homestead exemption, it is not a practice of unsecured creditors in this country to initiate any legal proceedings to try to foreclose on people's homes. Now, it's theoretically possible in some instances. It just doesn't happen. Virtually never happens with credit card debt or medical debt. It just doesn't happen. If the judgment's there, likely it would be a lien on the home. So if the home is ever sold or refinanced or transferred, the judgment would need to be paid off. Might not need to be paid off if there's no equity over the homestead, but the home, it's just going to sit there. And so it's not mandatory that you file a Chapter 13 to prevent a lien on your home because you're going to get in trouble. You'll need to do it. You can postpone it and worry about that later. It would happen. The debt would get paid when the home is sold at some point in the future. So for those reasons, bankruptcy isn't always in fact, I don't think it's very often a really good idea for seniors or the elderly or a lot of disabled persons, especially if they have lower incomes. There's just no need for them to file bankruptcy. There's nothing at risk. In addition, no one can take your personal property in a practical manner. No one's going to come take your car. No one's going to take your boat, or if you have a boat, or your furniture or anything like that. It's safe. Now, you got to be careful what you read on the internet. Some of the things I read on the internet about this is it's almost like people saying, well, if you drive on the road, you're going to get hit by a drunk driver. Or if you walk outside your front door, you're going to get hit by a meteorite. Or, they talk about things that are so remote chance of happening that we never live our lives according to that they're likely going to happen, and that's why we have to do things. Well, that's not the case here. Judgment creditors, by law, can't take your retirement income, and as a practical matter, they're never going to touch your foreclosing your home or take that or your personal possessions. So then what can you do if you don't need to file bankruptcy and you got all this debt? Well, as I explained earlier, I'm the executive director of HELPS, and what we do is simply represent seniors and people on disability for the purpose of having an attorney under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. We send letters to your collectors telling them, hey, you can't contact this person anymore, you have to contact HELPS. And they'll stop contacting you, they'll leave you alone, and we represent people on an ongoing basis years into the future. We don't turn anyone away. The cost, if there is a cost, it's absolutely minimal. It's a small monthly amount, usually less than a cheap cup of coffee a day, if that. Our website is very informative, www.helpsishere.org. That's help with an S on the end, ishere.org. And then we have a toll-free number, 855-435-7787. Or you can just Google HELPS Law Group. Talk to anyone, go over this with them. On occasion, people will call us, and bankruptcy might make sense for them, and we'll tell them to consult with a bankruptcy attorney. If you do need to file bankruptcy, it is important that you go to an attorney that's experienced. There's a lot of attorneys that advertise filing bankruptcy that are not very good at it, or are inexperienced, or they might lead people in to do it in an improper way. But generally, attorneys that specialize in bankruptcy and do a lot of them are pretty competent, and hopefully they will steer you in the right direction if you don't need to file bankruptcy, but not always. So it's good being doing this video, and you have a great day.